At this point, I'd like to hand over to Paul van der Merwe. He was the chair of the Architecture Forum of the Open Group in 2009, the body that develops and owns TOGAF. He was one of the contributing authors to TOGAF 9 and continually encourages collaborative participation in the development and adoption of EA as a business discipline. Paul is currently leading the enterprise architecture practice at Standard Bank, evolving a platform architecture that is aligned to the group's vision of transforming into a platform-based business that goes beyond financial services.
Good day, and thank you, Stuart, for the introduction. I'm presenting to you from the Digital Disruption Centre of Standard Bank Group in Johannesburg, South Africa. Standard Bank is the biggest lender on the African continent, has been in that role for the past 20 years, and also operating across 20 countries on the continent. It is really a privilege for me to be part of this memorable occasion of the Open Group, and I just want to extend my congratulations to the Open Group leadership and also the Open Group members. And I've have a lot of fond memories of the times that I were more active in the Open Group and still following the activities and the work of the Open Groups. The topic that I want to address today is around TOGAF for yesterday, today and tomorrow. And when I started to think about this topic, it reminded me of my sort of childhood. I grew up during my primary school years in the northern part of South Africa, which is very dry and warm. But there was one bush in our garden, which is a yesterday, today and tomorrow. And I thought it's such a nice analogy for what I want to present today. And I actually had to go and Google it to see, is each flower a different flower, different color, but actually it comes out as a deep purple, the initial flower, then it becomes, fades a bit until it goes to a white flower. So, and I think it's such an appropriate analogy to see how TOGAF has evolved, and especially the application of TOGAF in the way that we practice architecture over the number of years that I've been involved and used TOGAF. So as most of you know, TOGAF is the de facto standard for architecture in the world. And it was really a privilege for me to also be part of that journey and to especially promote the adoption of TOGAF within South Africa. And that's really what I want to share with you today, is just my reflections and some of my personal experiences, but also how we've promoted TOGAF within South Africa. Now, forgive me for doing this, but starting to talk about architecture, I must talk about John Zachman. So, on the slide, you will see I've also put a photo of John yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And I've never known John as yesterday, as the young guy that's on the photo, but I've seen him quite a lot over the past few years. And that was my introduction to architecture. I still recall it was in the early 90s when I started to work at Eskom, the electricity utility in South Africa. And I was on the internet then. There wasn't something like Google at the time. So I think it was Netscape or Internet Explorer or something like that, or IE, so I can't remember. And I was just Googling, not Googling, trying to find something around architecture. And then the internet was very limited in those days. And I found the article by John Zachman, his framework, which he published in the IBM journal. And something that struck me, because he actually came to visit South Africa just a few months after I started to look at his work. And something that really stayed with me over all the years, which is quite a number of years, is just that quote from him is, what is your strategy for addressing orders of magnitude increases in complexity and orders of magnitude increase in the rate of change? And then his answer to that, 7,000 years of history would suggest the only known strategy for addressing complexity and change is architecture. And that is really, when I practice architecture, and I've practiced it now for longer than what TOGAF is in existence. So it is always those two key questions that I ask myself. Do I help an organization to understand complexity, and do I help the organization to manage change? So, and also with the architects that I mentor and coach over the years, I always say, look at your artifacts and see if your artifacts are actually adding to complexity or actually help people to understand complexity. And then also, how do we actually, as architecture, help to manage change within the organization? So that has been my mantra over all the years, and I'm still true to that. And I'm very grateful for John introducing me to architecture and to his very powerful framework. So before I start with the yesterday of TOGAF, I just want to highlight 4 things in TOGAF that's really the 4 things that changed the way that I looked at architecture. And it's really around the architecture partitioning principle in TOGAF. And the first architecture partitioning principle is around the architecture domains. And it is around, I think a lot of us call it BIDAT, but the business, information, data, application, and technology. And I always wanted to know where that whole concept started, or this domain breakdown. And it actually started by the paper published by the NIST organization in November 1988, where they actually described these domains. And just going back to the primary reason why we do architecture is to bring that alignment between business and technology. So, and that concept is so embedded in TOGAF, especially in the architecture development method, where we in the architecture vision phase already look at business, data, application, and technology, and also then in phases B, C, and D. But what I always emphasize, and the way I practice architecture, which is also supported by TOGAF, is that we shouldn't just do technology architecture. We must understand the business context, and we need to understand how information flows through the organization and how we can automate it through technology. So those are really such an important understanding of those domains, and also practicing it to actually make architecture successful. The second partitioning concept that is also embedded in TOGAF is the whole time-based partitions. And here I'm actually thinking about the book that Spivak wrote about enterprise architecture planning. And by the way, it's Spivak who was the first guy who coined the term enterprise architecture in his book. So, and the whole idea of we must understand the as-is that a lot of people refer to it, the to-be, and then the roadmap of how to move from the as-is to the to-be. And that is embedded in TOGAF in terms of the baseline architecture, the target architecture, and then determining the transition architectures as you move from baseline to target. And again, that's content that has been embedded in TOGAF, and critical things, especially now where we are moving into the tomorrow, where a lot of people are only focusing on today. So because of Agile and the misinterpretation of how Agile works, a lot of people are just implementing the today architecture instead of thinking about tomorrow and the future state, target state architectures. So the third partition that we're looking at, which I think is very important to understand, is the whole concept of the enterprise continuum. And here we are looking at how Zachman introduced the whole perspectives, from a conceptual to logical to physical, and how it's embedded in TOGAF is around the enterprise continuum, where we've got the architecture continuum, our architecture building blocks, where we think about what are the concepts we want to bring in, what are the logical architecture building blocks, and then how it evolves into our physical architectures, which we call the solution architecture building blocks within TOGAF, or the solution building blocks. And again, that concept is so critical to TOGAF that people understand it and apply that evolution from conceptual to logical to physical, which is in essence applying the logic behind the Zachman framework. And then the fourth and the last concept that I want to share is then the architecture landscape, which is also, a TOGAF concept, saying that we need to think about the strategic architecture across the enterprise, then think about the segment architectures as we divide the architecture or the organization like we do in financial services. It's usually more a product-based or a customer segment type-based organization. In manufacturing, it will be more according to the process and that. And then at the bottom, our capability architecture. So, and understanding that you must do all of those architectures, but they must also align to each other, and that strong alignment that we must build across the three layers: the strategic, the segment, and then the capability architecture. So those are the four concepts that are fundamental to TOGAF. And when I present TOGAF courses to some of the internal architects at Standard Bank, those are probably the four concepts that I spend half a day on, because if you understand that, then TOGAF will be so much easier to understand and to apply in your day-to-day architecture work. So with that, I then want to go into the yesterday of TOGAF and the deep purple side. So, and whether deep purple has got a deeper meaning, I'm not sure. And so as I said, the Zachman framework was my introduction into architecture. But I still remember the day we were sitting in one of the previous offices of Real RM, and TOGAF, Stuart was sitting across the table from me, and he said, "Paul, we must start to look at TOGAF now, because TOGAF 8 has been published, and we're moving away from technology architecture into enterprise architecture now." And I can't remember if it was probably around 2004 and that. So, and I just thought, Stuart, are you mad? We're doing Zachman training here and Zachman architecture. Why do we need to go to TOGAF now? Do they actually understand? So, and after some time and getting accustomed to the whole TOGAF concept and that, and understanding, especially with TOGAF 8, where we didn't have the content framework, how the two frameworks actually complement each other, I actually became very comfortable with it. I understood that TOGAF really gives you the method, where Zachman gives you the classification framework. And then I did my training. So, and I need to thank Judith Jones, who is running Architecting the Enterprise in the UK, because that was in 2006. I did an online course, imagine that in the pre-COVID world. And I actually certified on TOGAF 8 through ATE. And then we presented the first TOGAF course in South Africa. And I still remember how I was sort of one day ahead of the delegates on the course in terms of the material and that. But that is how we started to introduce TOGAF in South Africa. And there was a huge adoption over the next few years. We were really promoting TOGAF, starting initially with some of the utility companies like Sasol, which is one of our energy utility companies, with Eskom, our electricity utility. And then we started to go into retail, into financial services, basically all the industries, and just showing that TOGAF can actually make a difference and is relevant to any industry. So, and to such an extent that Sasol actually started to implement TOGAF and the ADM and aligned it as a formal process into their whole solution development practice. So, and they actually presented at one of the Open Group conferences in South Africa, as well as one of the global conferences still in Paris, I remember, on how they've actually aligned TOGAF, the ADM, and put that into their overall solution development process. So, the other major success with TOGAF, and it was still TOGAF 8, that we started to work on, was the government-wide enterprise architecture framework that we worked very closely with Juliet Segole, who was the head of the Group Information Technology Officers Council at the time of the overall South African government, as well as Willie Needham, who was the lead architect for government at the time. And with them, we've used TOGAF to put together what we call GWEA, and that was really introducing TOGAF and enterprise architecture into the public sector in South Africa. So, and we had really huge success and building a community around TOGAF in such a way that we had about 20 people who actively worked on TOGAF 9 and reviewed the standard as it evolved. And actually in the TOGAF 9 standard, there's a lot of acknowledgement to a lot of the South Africans who participated in the reviews, which we are very proud of. So I just want to share a final thing around yesterday, and that's probably the biggest achievement to me around how we've applied TOGAF, and that's when I was working at Nedbank as an enterprise architect. We were brought into Nedbank because the CIO had the understanding and the vision that to start to implement or develop a business transformation plan over 8 years for how Nedbank is going to transform to be ready for this new world. They brought in a lot of enterprise architects, and I was one of the enterprise architects that participated in that. And over a 2-year period, we, using architecture and actually applying the TOGAF ADM, we put together an 8-year transformation plan for Nedbank, and that went to the Group Exco as well as the board, and there was only one submission. And because of the architecture diligence that we applied and the way we've actually presented it, they just approved it and really acknowledged the value that architecture brought to Nedbank in applying it in such a way. So, and on the slides, I'm just showing you, the preliminary phase that took us about 6 months in terms of the ADM, setting up the architecture framework, the architecture organization, the governance processes and that. So in terms of business architecture, we've actually gone through all the business strategies, understanding what is the vision of each of the divisions, doing business architecture as it's stipulated within the ADM of TOGAF. And then the same with the application architecture and the data architecture, where we've actually analyzed the full application portfolio, understood it in terms of where it supports business capabilities, where's the end-of-life technologies and so forth, as well as the data flow across the organization. And that started to give us a view on the gaps of where we need to start to introduce the transformation in the overall technology landscape aligned to the overall strategy. And then as part of the opportunities and solutions phase of the ADM, we then put together our migration strategy with all the major work packages, and then went through a very diligent migration planning stage. And that resulted in this transformation plan with an 8-year span, as well as a well thought out budget in that. So, which was then accepted by the board, within the first submission. So what I really enjoyed also at Nedbank of the experience is the way we've applied the ADM first for 2 years, going through the ADM to get to that overall transformation plan, but then looking at all the work packages and starting again to iterate through the ADM to come up with the release plans for each of the work packages. And then for each of the release blueprints that we've developed, you go down to a solution architecture level and then apply the solution architecture in terms of the ADM, incorporate it into the overall SDLC, just again practically showing how the ADM can be used at a strategic level, but then down also at the operational level, where we've implemented the solutions over time. So that was a major success story of using TOGAF in a very practical way and showing the benefit of that. So if we get to the end of yesterday, just to summarize, what I realized is you will never get architects to follow a process. So So don't be prescriptive, but start to use TOGAF as a thinking framework. Very helpful. It helps to standardize the architecture language across the organization. Very useful in getting architects to at least agree on terms. I saw it as a major community building exercise. So people started within South Africa, build a community around TOGAF, but also within the organization. We can, and we actually proved that we can use TOGAF across all industries, and also that you can use it at various levels of the organization. So that's just my reflection on the yesterday, and we can step into the today. So talking about today, the flower is starting to fade. It becomes a bit more lilac. So, and whether it's fading or maturing, that we will see. So, and when I talk about today, it's probably the last 3 or 4 years. And what I want to talk about is really just sort of 3 key things that we're starting to see happening and that are very prevalent in the technology world. So the first thing is around, is TOGAF relevant in an agile world? And a lot of times when I talk about TOGAF or I present training on TOGAF, a lot of people will look at what we call in the TOGAF community, the crop circle or the ADM. And they would say to me, this is waterfall. So why are we even still talking about it? We're in the agile world, so why is it still relevant? So let's go and look for another way of doing architecture that's aligned to the agile world. So, and I'm not convinced that TOGAF is not agile. So one of the key things about TOGAF is it is an iterative method. So the ADM is very clearly stated in TOGAF 9 as an iterative method, although the graphic around the ADM does look like a more waterfall approach. So, and I always say, if people look at each bubble, architecture vision, business architecture, you immediately think, that bubble must be about 3 months to do that. So, and then you add up and then you say, okay, this is going to take me 2 years. We don't have time for that. We need a more agile approach. And my view is you can take 3 months on each bubble, or, it can take you 2 years to go through the ADM, but I can also execute the ADM within a week. So it's not the duration, it's really, did you apply the thinking that's required in each phase, and have you actually iterated in the right sequence to actually achieve the architecture outcome that you wanted to achieve? So, and I always reflect on this sort of Mona Lisa picture when people are telling me that, in the agile world, we don't need architecture. We iterative, so we just build, small increments. And that is really the word that I'm looking for, increments. So we just start to build, the Mona Lisa, but we're not sure what the whole picture would look like. So we're just adding, and as I show on the slide, in the end, what we get is really not a Mona Lisa, it's more a Picasso. So, and if we really apply Agile correctly, you will have a clear view of your target state. It won't be the detailed Mona Lisa all colored in and that, but you will have the outline. And then, and that's really the role of architecture, to give you that target state. Where are you going? And then you start to iterate through it, not incrementally, but iteratively deliver MVPs that start to color in the overall Mona Lisa. And that's how I see applying the TOGAF ATM in an agile world, where architecture and TOGAF is still very relevant. So the second topic that's very popular over the last number of years, and I still recall I was sitting in a Gartner conference in somewhere in the United States, just when cloud was starting to become a hot topic, and the presenter asked for people to put up their hands who would support the idea that within 10 years' time, a lot of organizations will have their whole technology estate within the cloud. And I think there were about 10% of people who did raise their hands. And today, that's the reality. We are moving into a cloud world. And even Standard Bank is on a aggressive cloud journey, as it has been already publicized. So, and here I see the architecture continuum coming very handy. So, understanding how we start to make our architectures more generic so that we can move to cloud. So how do we actually make it more generic for future reuse? How do we actually guide the organization that we don't just do a lift or shift, but that we refactor, replatform, and replace? Because running technology in the cloud is not the same as running technology in a data center. The whole business and technology management mindset that must change, and how architecture must start to drive the migration roadmaps and the deployment models. And then the last topic that is very popular currently in the today is really the whole API economy. And so many people refer to Jeff Bezos' platform mandates that everything must be an API, and if you don't have an API, you will be fired. And again here, it's so important for architecture to support the whole API economy by applying those architecture domains and make sure that we understand APIs at a business level, that we understand APIs at an information level, and what's the information that is actually part of that API, and also at the data application and technology level. I think APIs, just too easy to say we must go APIs, and not enough thought put to it across all the various architecture domains that we must think of. So for me today, in conclusion, is TOGAF does support agility. It is an iterative method, and it actually very well explained in the TOGAF standard. I just think we must get past that mental block that it has been developed in the waterfall era, but it can be applied in the agile era as well. Cloud, API, microservices, those are just different styles of architecture, and TOGAF allows you to apply the ADM to any of those architecture styles. We don't have to reinvent TOGAF, we must just apply it correctly. And that is my view on where we are with TOGAF today. I still use it on a daily basis. And now we're getting to tomorrow. So the flower has gone white now, and maybe also indicative of how my understanding of TOGAF and how to apply it within organizations is also maturing. So I'm also fortunate to have Cape Town in my background as one of my favorite cities, so if not my favorite city here. So in terms of TOGAF and the future, Standard Bank has announced in August of this year that we're moving into a digital platform company with very ambitious targets for 2025. And that obviously made me also think, for quite a number of months now, on how do we support Standard Bank as the architecture practice within Standard Bank, and applying the TOGAF thinking in moving and assisting the company or the group to move into that platform-based organization that was revealed to the public in August 2021. And one of the graphics that I really like is the MIT graphic around how to become future ready. The quadrant model in terms of where most banks are actually in the silo spaghetti stage, but you can either start to focus on client experience and do that sort of integrated experience, improving that whole engagement with your clients, or you can go the industrialized way where you're actually optimizing your technology, your backbone, and actually run a far more efficient operation. Or you can go stepwise, which is the way that we've developed the plan for NetBank, and which they called Managed Evolution. Or you can totally go just immediately future ready and not go through a transition stage. And this is a model that's debated a lot within Standard Bank, but also from an architecture perspective, depending on which pathway we follow, that will also have architecture implementations. And we need to be there to actually guide and advise the organization on how to move forward on this future-ready strategy that we're following. So, and a key concept that needs to be understood, and the whole mindset that must change in the group and in the bank, is this whole platform ecosystem, the understanding of providers and consumers and how they start to interact on a platform, and how Standard Bank will play within that scenario, whether we will be an ecosystem orchestrator or modular producer. And all of those things has got architecture impacts that we need to consider and provide the required guidance on. And actually, it just takes us back to yesterday. So how would we do it? If you remember how I started this presentation, looking at those 4 key fundamental concepts in TOGAF, understanding every move that we make in terms of business information, data application, and technology. So following that whole domain approach, using the enterprise continuum and evolving concepts from a conceptual point of view into a logical and then into a physical. So starting to understand where we want to go and understanding that business context before we just make our technology decisions. Aligning the various domains, unpacking the strategy, have a clear architecture understanding of the strategy, applying it to the various segments, and then also applying it to our underlying capabilities. And then also one not to be forgotten is, what is our target state? What is the target state architecture? And moving with agility towards that, how do we start to define our transition architectures to get to that future-ready target state that we're envisioning? So for the tomorrow, I still believe architecture is relevant, if not even more relevant. So, and coming back to what I've started with in this presentation, how do we as architecture help the organization to understand the complexity that we're dealing and the rate of complexity that's actually increasing at close to exponential rate? How do we help to manage change within the organization? So how do we actually, through the architecture that we do, facilitate the whole process around change that's required within the organization? And TOGAF is as relevant as always in applying that. So I see TOGAF still as the framework that we can apply in terms of our thinking, taking the bank forward, as well as in any other organization. That is really what I wanted to share with you today. TOGAF relevant yesterday, today, and tomorrow. I really hope that this gave you a new perspective on how TOGAF can be applied, but also the importance of architecture, and that we should actually all work towards promoting architecture to help organizations grow. And I really want to thank the Open Group for the vision to actually establish the Architecture Forum within the Open Group and to develop and actually sustain a standard as TOGAF that is really contributing hugely to the technology world, but also to the business world, because we're not talking about technology architecture, but also enterprise architecture. Thank you very much. It was a privilege to be part of this celebration, and may there be another 25 years of success for the Open Group.